Iran's Revolutionary Guard is responding to a pair of deadly attacks in the capital city of Tehran today. At least 12 people died when suicide bombers and gunmen stormed the National Parliament building and the Khomeni shrine. Iran says Saudi Arabia is to blame for the attack. CBS News' Roxana Saberi joins me now on set. She spent 6 years reporting in Iran. So, Roxana, what has been Iran's official response so far since the attacks?
We've heard a lot of widespread condemnation of the attacks by the Revolutionary Guards, which are the strongest and most powerful security forces in Iran. They have vowed revenge, and they're also blaming Saudi Arabia for the attacks. This is a charge Saudi Arabia denies. Meanwhile, the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, has also condemned the attacks, but he has not mentioned Saudi Arabia.
Right. He is calling for unity here, so he's taking a little bit of a different line from the Revolutionary Guard. Let's go ahead and put this up for you. The White House just put out a statement on this. It reads, "We grieve and pray for the innocent victims of the terrorist attacks in Iran and for the Iranian people who are going through such challenging times. We underscore that states that sponsor terrorism risk falling victim to the evil they promote." What does that response tell us?
Well, to me, the second part of that response, we underscore that states that sponsor terrorism risk falling victim to the evil they promote, is almost in a way blaming Iran for inciting this kind of attack, which is a little bit confusing because the kind of groups that Iran supports are mostly Shiite groups like the Hezbollah in Lebanon or Shiite militia in Iraq and the Assad regime in Syria, and they have been fighting ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I mean, the first part of that, grieving and praying for the innocent victims of the terrorist attacks in Iran, I'm glad to see that, and I think a lot of Iranians would appreciate that.
It certainly seems like a strange dichotomy between the fact that we do have a common enemy in ISIS, yet there's also this rising tension between the U.S. and Iran, and then, of course, you have those set of Gulf states that have just come out cutting off Qatar, saying because of the ties to Iran. It seems like tensions are really rising in the Middle East.
They are. They have been rising between Iran and the United States, most recently after President Trump went to Saudi Arabia. And actually, the Revolutionary Guards referred to that visit and said that these attacks have happened after President Trump visited Saudi Arabia, and basically that was in their statement blaming Saudi Arabia. Right. And during that visit, President Trump called on Arab leaders to basically isolate Iran. So we've also seen, in addition to those tensions between Iran and the U.S., intensifying tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I mean, they've never had very good relations, particularly since the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, but more recently because Saudi Arabia blames Iran for interfering in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, and in Lebanon. And Iran blames Saudi Arabia for spreading terrorism and facilitating the growth of ISIS.
Quite the back and forth, and you actually mentioned a few countries that have sided with Saudi Arabia in cutting off Qatar. Okay, let's talk about the fact that this hasn't, this attack in terms of Iran, they haven't seen this level of terrorism for many years. That's
right. In the 1980s, shortly after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the Mujahideen al-Khalq is a group. It was carrying out terrorist attacks in Tehran and also a number of assassinations, but mostly in the 1980s, were bombings and assassinations. After the 1980s, it has been relatively quiet in Tehran. There have been some terrorist attacks on the southeastern border of Iran with Pakistan by separatists, but Tehran, the capital, has been pretty safe. And I think a lot of Iranians had felt safe until now, so this kind of shatters that bubble of security.
What do you think this feels like for the people of Iran, particularly, as you say, the people who may live in the capital?
I've been speaking to a couple of people there inside Iran, journalists and others. One person told me she felt very afraid today. She was riding the subway in Tehran, which can be very crowded, and she said she was afraid there could be an attack. And she was going to limit some of her movements outside and try to avoid busy areas, but that's difficult because Tehran is a bustling city of 8 to 9 million people. It's hard to avoid crowds. On the other hand, I also spoke to somebody who said while she is feeling more cautious, she's also just carrying on. It's Ramadan month in Tehran, so she was breaking her fast and eating dinner and said, we just have to be resilient.
Why do you think a group like ISIS would want to attack Iran? And really, what do they stand to gain for having a stronghold potentially there?
Well, I think it's very difficult for them to gain a stronghold for a couple of reasons. One is that Iran is so much a security state. The Revolutionary Guards has a pretty tight grip on security. Iran shares a border with 7 countries, like a land border. And
but this certainly must be a wake-up call, right?
It is definitely a wake-up call. And so I'm surprised, actually, there had not been an attack until now, despite this tight grip on security. But one reason, in addition to that security, may be that Iran is mostly Shiite Muslim, 90% Shiite Muslim. There just aren't that many Sunni Muslims to whom this message that ISIS has would appeal if ISIS was behind this attack. As we know, ISIS has been losing ground in Iraq and Syria, and this may have been a way, if they were really behind the attacks, to try to boost morale of its followers.
All right, Roxana Saberi, thank you so much for your insight.
You're welcome.